Hi, my name is Michael Hardigan, and I'm going to give an update on the status of the Caneberry breeding program at the USDA-ARS in Corvallis. I was hired last June 2020 as a postdoc, so I've been here around 8 months. So last year, 2020, was an incredibly challenging year for a lot of reasons, COVID and beyond. So it was a little bit of a different year. I think one of the big differences as far as program activity was that we put a pause on making new crosses to wait for the new Caneberry breeder to be hired. We expect that to resume this year in 2021. Some selections were made last year, but we also expect a better capacity this year with a dedicated breeder and people in the program not being stretched so thin. But we've been continuing advanced selection trials in cooperation with Oregon State at the NREC location and continuing to work with the National Clean Plant Network for germplasm cleanup and distribution. Just to give a little overview of what we did with our germplasm last year, as I mentioned before, no crosses were made, but about 4,400 seedlings were planted into the field, and we made about 96 selections, although just because of the nature of last year and having limited time, a lot of these will go to observation instead of replicated trials initially. But we were able to make some promising selections. As far as selections that went into trial, as usual, a large number of Blackberries, a lot of them being trailing types, but also semi-erect and primocane fruiting. Large number of floricane and primocane fruiting red raspberries, as well as black raspberries, although we're starting to downsize on the black raspberry end a little bit. And as usual, we are also planting Washington State varieties at our trial location, as well as numerous cultivar standards. We have several selections going for grower trial, 34, and 5 of those 34, in addition to one that isn't available at nurseries yet, we are planning on naming. So just as a program breakdown by crop, about half of the seedlings we planted are Blackberry, and of those about half are trailing types, the other half are semi-erect and primocane fruiting types. Red raspberry makes up a smaller but still large proportion of the program, around 40%, and those are usually around half and half floricane and primocane fruiting, and then around 10% black raspberry. These are all screened for aphid resistance. For selections made this year, around 35% were Blackberry, over 50% were red raspberry, and under 10% were black raspberry. So we are planning to resume crosses, as I said before, in 2021, and I just want to confirm that we will resume crossing and working with each of the species and each of the types we're working with before. So Blackberry, trailing, semi-erect, and primocane, red raspberry, both floricane and primocane, and black raspberry we plan to resume, and we expect to have new seedlings for 2022. Just to give a couple of notes on the Caneberry germplasm here, so nothing has been lost with respect to genetic diversity. We're working with the same germplasm. We're continuing to work with the National Clean Plant Network for cleanup and distribution of plant material. A new virologist will be hired at HCRU soon, so we're hoping to maintain a sort of historic cooperation between those programs. And as I said before, we're going to continue working on Blackberry, red raspberry, and black raspberry. So for Blackberry, some of the major goals for the program are developing high-yielding, thornless, winter-tolerant germplasm that are adapted to mechanical harvesting and have excellent fruit quality. And right now we have a large pool of both thornless, trailing, and semi-erect selections that are adapted to the Pacific Northwest, have great yield and fruit quality. We have a smaller pool of erect primocane selections, and we have several of these that are currently ready to name and release. And the area we're interested in but haven't done a lot of work yet with in Oregon is developing machine harvestable varieties. Most of that work has been in red raspberry, or in raspberry so far. For red raspberry, a lot of overlap as far as developing high-yielding machine harvestable varieties with great processing fruit quality, with fresh market being a little bit lower of a priority than processing in the Northwest. But high yielding, of course, is important, and we're doing work with both Washington State and and Agri-Food Canada on this. So the status of the red raspberry work, we have ongoing machine harvest trials of our selections and Washington's selections at OSU NREC here in Oregon, but also cooperating with Washington State and testing our varieties up in Linden, Washington. And those are both machine harvest trials. And then we also have Prime-Ark fruiting selections that have great flavor for fresh market. Among the blackberry or black raspberry germplasm, one of the biggest goals was to develop aphid-resistant varieties with greater yields and processed fruit quality similar to Munger. So this part of the program is a little bit unique. It's a smaller part of the program, but we do annual screening for aphid resistance using genetic markers that predict multiple sources of resistance. So all of our black raspberry germplasm is aphid resistant, and we now have a lot of selections that have comparable yield and better size to Munger and good processed quality. And we're also doing machine harvest trials of black raspberry in addition to red raspberry. So as I mentioned before, we've been continuing our trials at OSU NREC in cooperation with Oregon State. And this is working with Bernadine Strick, Pat Jones, Amanda Davis, and also Zach Wiegand back in Corvallis, who's a member of the Food Science Department. And this is really one of the most critical parts of the breeding program. It's essential for the program to test its advanced selections. And we do this under more industry standard conditions than we can manage down here in Corvallis. And we do this alongside both Washington State selections as well as industry standard cultivars. So we can get important data on machine harvest quality and our selections, as well as yield, fruit size, and other important observations. And we send the most promising selections down to OSU Food Science, where we get more information on the processing quality of some of these selections. We're hoping to maintain our cooperative breeding efforts in the Pacific Northwest beyond Oregon. As I mentioned before, working with Washington State, British Columbia, Michael Dossett up in British Columbia, Wendy Hawashi Earhart at Washington State, and also Enfield Farms in Washington. So we have on-farm machine harvest trials in Linden with Washington State and British Columbia. We have trials at WSU in Puyallup, Washington, looking at blackberries and raspberries. We get root rot information and just performance information and replicated trials. And also blackberry and raspberry trials at Enfield Farms, and they provide us important data as well. And looking forward, it also looks like we may potentially be getting a technician working with the Horticultural Crop Research Unit up in Mount Vernon, Washington. So this wouldn't be a breeding specific location for our trials, but it is someplace where we potentially may be planting at least a subset of our current selections from the program, where we could collaboratively work with physiologists and pathologists here in the research unit in Corvallis to generate information that we can use for the breeding program, but also help support other projects here at HCRU. We're also testing blackberries from the program outside of Oregon and Washington. So we're working with Gina Fernandez at NC State, and she is conducting some trials in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina at 5 different grower locations. And while a lot of the germplasm in the program isn't well adapted to hotter climates, Chad had been working on some east-west hybrids using North Carolina and Arkansas germplasm, and we're interested to see if any of those can perform in the Southeast. So another major goal for the program for 2021 is to name and release some new cultivars. We have several blackberry selections that are very exciting for us right now, and we're looking forward to naming and releasing, including ORUS 4670-1, a semi-erect thornless variety with great yield and fruit quality, 499-2, an erect Prime-Ark that's early with high yield and high fruit quality, and a 4535-1, which is a dwarf trailing ornamental. It's more of a novelty, home garden targeted plant. So it's a trailing variety, but it has very short internodes, so it could grow in a pot, fairly upright, Has really nice flowers, but for an ornamental, it actually has pretty decent fruit quality and good flavor. Here's some pictures of 4535-1. The flowers, the fruit, you can see it has a dwarf habit. So as I mentioned before, this would be more for a home garden market, sort of a novelty. We haven't decided on a final name for this one yet, but we're planning to release it. 499-2 is a Prime-Ark fruiting blackberry. So it is thorny, but it has very high yield. Chad had noted that had double the yield of Prime-Ark 45 in first year for this selection compared to established, I think, 2-year-old plants for Prime-Ark. Similar fruit size and similar season or slightly earlier. Looks like it has similar storage quality, so we're looking to release this as well. And this selection, 4670-1, a thornless semi-erect, we're very excited about. We're thinking of tentatively naming it Equinox. It's part of that same Celestial series, coming from some of the East-West hybrid selections that Chad had made. And it has higher yield than Chester Thornless. Its average across 3 years, 2018 to 2020, was 37% higher at our OSU NREC location, and it has much better flavor. So we're very happy it has better yield and better flavor than Chester. It's about 10 days earlier than Chester, and the fruit are medium-sized, a little bit bigger than Chester, similar firmness, so good fruit quality. And Mary Peterson from our program actually did a little pilot experiment, and just looking at clamshells placed in a walk-in cooler for 4670-1 and Chester and some other cultivars, and it looks like it's post-harvest with regard to the onset of botrytis or mold is pretty good. It's comparable to or better than some of the existing cultivars we looked at based on this mini pilot. For red raspberry, we're planning on releasing a Prime-Ark fruiter with great flavor and yield, 4716-1. It has bright and firm fruit. It has excellent flavor and yield, excellent wholesale potential, and the thing that Chad really liked about this one is that he noted it can be harvested light pink with really good sweet raspberry flavor, even when it's light colored. But it looks like after a couple of weeks it darkens up to more of a typical raspberry color. But it can also be harvested, at full color. It just has the ability to be harvested early still with good flavor. So that's an interesting one. We're planning to release that. And then a couple of black raspberry releases, a little bit lower priority than our blackberry releases, but a couple of interesting things. We have this 3381-1. It's got good yield. It's very late. It's later than Munger, so it's intended as a Mac Black replacement, and it's got great flavor, fresh or frozen. And then this last one, actually, we're trying to get into nurseries. It's not available just yet, but it's sort of a novelty. It's a purple thornless black raspberry. So it has purple fruit with sort of this cloudy, dusty color. So it's kind of interesting looking, and it's actually derived from a red raspberry by black raspberry hybrid. But it's interesting because it's not red or black, it's purple, and it's a thornless black raspberry hybrid. So it's actually kind of fun. So now that I've given a little overview, hopefully, we just want to let people know that the program is still active. We're still actively breeding and will be in 2021. So looking ahead, we're planning to resume crosses, and we'll have more time to focus on making selections this year compared to 2020. One of our big priorities is just maintaining the collaborative relationships that have been essential to the program. Working with OSU for licensing the cultivars that we patent, and also performing our running our trials at OSU NREC, which is essential for the program, and working with collaborators in the Pacific Northwest like Washington State and British Columbia, and also seeking new research projects and collaborations to support and inform the future breeding work. We're interested in disease screening, developing low-cost molecular marker screening tools in fruit quality and chemistry. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and just acknowledge some of the collaborators that we have: Oregon State, Washington State. I couldn't find a logo, but Michael Dossett up in British Columbia, who we work with as well. Gina Fernandez at NC State, Margaret Worthington at the University of Arkansas, who we've sent some material to for some genetics work, as well as industry groups, Northwest Center for Small Fruits Research, the Oregon Raspberry Blackberry Commission, Washington Red Raspberry Commission, Enfield Farms, a lot of industry partners that are important to us as well. And thank you. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. My name is Courtney Weber. I am the berry breeder at Cornell University, located at Cornell Agritech, which is at the New York State Agricultural Experiment Station in Geneva, New York, about an hour north of Ithaca. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about my breeding program in raspberries and blackberries, developing varieties for a cool climate production region. Cornell has a long history with raspberry and blackberry production and breeding. The breeding program was one of the original breeding programs developed when the station opened in 1882 and was continued when the station became part of Cornell in the 1920s. Over that time, we've developed 43 different raspberry varieties, many of which are available commercially today. Varieties like Jewel and Bristol Black Raspberry, Royalty and Brandywine Purple, Heritage, Prelude, and Encore Red Raspberry, as well as the newer varieties I've developed, Crimson Treasure, Crimson Knight, Double Gold, and Crimson Giant. There has been some blackberry work over the years with 3 different varieties developed, but Darrow is the only one that I still see around, some available for growers. But we are working more on blackberries and hope to release some new varieties in the future. So the cool production region in North America is a fairly large region throughout it covers the Midwestern United States, the southern part of Canada, into the mid-Atlantic states and in New England and the eastern part of Canada. There is a very diverse stakeholder group through that region that grow and consume raspberries. There are certainly home gardeners. It's a very popular product to have in home gardens, retail nurseries, and of course our commercial producers. In our region, we primarily see direct retail and local sales for raspberries and blackberries through farm markets and farmers markets, of which there are many hundreds. There's still pick your own. It's very common and very popular still because our summers are short and people really like to get outside and get out on the farm. And that is often supplemented with fruit that then is available at the farm market itself. So they do a little bit of pick your own and then buy some maybe pre-picked fruit as well to round out their purchases. And then we still see some local, and we do see some local wholesale as well. We have produce auctions popping up around here. And then there are some regional supermarkets that will accept local fruit. And so there are growers that are selling into those markets as well. So the Cornell Caneberry breeding program covers red raspberry, black raspberry, and black raspberry. In red and black raspberry, blackberry. In red and black raspberry, we're doing both primocane and floricane breeding. In blackberry, it is primarily primocane fruiting that we are looking for. In both black raspberry and blackberry, spine-free is a primary trait that we're interested in to make these varieties a little easier to work with from the grower's perspective. Now, there are challenges certainly to growing in cool climate areas, but there's also great potential in these regions. Of course, on the challenge side, the weather can be quite challenging. We get a lot of rain in the spring. It can cause root rots in our heavy soils when we get saturated soils. Of course, the wintertime, we get a lot of snow. Generally, the snow is not the big problem. It can be the really low temperatures, especially in the upper Midwest and lower Canada. And then the wind, we get a lot of wind. And if you're trying to use high tunnels, it can be a problem. So we really have to be aware of that and mitigate that for the production. And so with that, we are lacking some of the infrastructure that goes along with raspberry production. We don't have a lot of high tunnels, and we need growers in order to produce a high quality product for a larger market. They will need tunnels. And with that would come the packing houses and coolers that are required for raspberries. Cold chain management is such a big deal when it comes to producing good quality raspberry and blackberry fruit. And then the trucking to go along with that. Most of our producers are selling locally or very close to their production area, and so they don't really need the trucking. And the ones that do the trucks with the stone fruits and apples, those really are not compatible with raspberries because of ethylene problems. And so there has to be some infrastructure in order to expand that cropping system in the cool climates. And then there's labor shortages. There's a lot of competition for other specialty crops and dairy in our region, and more problems with importing more migrant labor. And so that is going to be an issue. If we can encourage people to grow more raspberries, they're going to need more labor. But we do have good proximities to the customers. Those corridors from Chicago to Boston and from Boston to DC in the United States is a tremendous customer base. The consumers through there have a higher consumption rate than other parts of the country, and they are looking for locally produced fruit in the summertime. And so there are good markets, and there's a large direct market because people, like I said, they're trying to go out to the farms, they're going to farmers markets, they're really looking for locally grown fruit. And so there is great potential for sales of fresh raspberries and blackberries in the region. And relatively, the land costs are low. Relative to California, certainly, specialty crop ground in California is essentially out of reach for most growers. But in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic states, land can still be had or rented at a very reasonable rate in order to produce raspberries and blackberries. And the climate is not as bad as long as you can mitigate the rain. The climate is actually very good for perennial production. This is the region where raspberries are natively grown. And so that winter time when they can get some chilling gives us the ability to have a floricane crop and a primocane crop in a perennial production system and have raspberries for a fairly long period of time. In my location, we can have raspberries from certainly mid-June until the end of November. And as you go south, you can get better seasons than that. And so we can have a very large, long season in the east and access a very large market. So in general, the program goals across all the fruit tend to be pretty similar. Of course, we need high fruit quality and yield. That includes flavor, firmness, large size for better harvesting, non-darkening during storage for the red varieties, lack of red druplet reversion in the blackberries. The yield must be able to be maintained for perennial production. So that means we need these plants to come back strong each year. They need good disease resistance with high tolerance to root rots, Phytophthora in the red raspberries and verticillium in the black raspberries. And as we implement more tunnels, powdery mildew resistance is a must. We don't see it as much in red raspberry, although there are varieties that are susceptible. The black raspberries are especially sensitive, and we need to increase resistance to those. And then with those tunnels as well, we want a more open canopy, both for harvest, but for disease resistance as well, or disease tolerance. Better airflow and better penetration of pesticide sprays is needed to make sure that these high tunnel production systems with their high crop load avoid some of the fungal problems that we see sometimes in raspberry and blackberry. And so that's an adaptation to high tunnel production that goes hand in hand with all of these other things that we need in order to have varieties that are productive and produce good quality fruit. So specifically in floricane red raspberry, where we're seeing the most problems is increasing the productivity. We need better crop load, and with the crop load, we need better fruit size, especially in the early varieties. So varieties like Prelude and Killarney right now are the early season standards, and the fruit size is really small, generally 2.5 grams, not really where the commercial quality is, where people want larger fruit in the 4, 5, 6 gram range. And so we need bigger fruit earlier in the season. Winter hardiness can be an issue, more of an issue in blackberry, but we do see some absolute cold damage in red raspberry, but more often it's because we had a warm spell in late winter or early spring, and then we had a hard freeze after. And so we want them to not come out of dormancy too much on those warm spells and try to avoid some of those spring freeze damage events. And then with high tunnels, again, we see more white druplet problems, especially late in the summer when it gets really hot and humid under those tunnels. But that season starts earlier and earlier because the tunnels tend to increase the temperature under the tunnels and increase the humidity, which seems to be problematic for white druplet formation. But we need growers to put in the high tunnels. So this is something we're working on in breeding and there seems to be a large genetic component to that. So we think we can breed towards material that is less prone to white druplet. Here's that particular disorder. You can see the druplets get wiped out, and the color goes away, and they really look unattractive in a container. They're not harmful to eat, certainly, but consumers are generally not attracted to this kind of fruit. So this is what the type of plant we're looking for. We see that the fruit is held away from the plant, so it's easily accessed, and the pedicels are wide and long so that they are held apart from each other, so we don't see gray mold spreading amongst the fruit if we happen to get a rotten berry. This 1548 has very good eating quality. The flavor's excellent. Tends to be a little darker, a little more purplish than I'd like, a little duller in color. That's been a challenge because a lot of the floricane material has that dull fruit color, but we're trying to get a brighter red color. But this is something that we're trialing to see how it is perceived in the marketplace. But you can see a very good crop load, very healthy plant with the fruit displayed well for harvest. Moving into the Prime-Ark red raspberry program, that is probably the largest part of my program. We're looking, of course, for fruit quality and productivity. We want high flavor and non-darkening, and we want firm fruit so it does have some shelf life and can be shipped. We're looking for large crop load and large fruit size for better fruit yields and for better harvest efficiency. The real challenge has been for the early season. It seems to be easier to get large fruit in the later season as those fruit have longer to develop. But for the early season, it can be a challenge because often the canes are short when those flowers come on and you don't get a high enough yield. So to get a large fruited type early can be a difficult combination. And we see more double fruit as well in those early materials. What we see is that those flowers that are developed during the hottest time of the year, July and August, can have problems physiologically, and you get split receptacles and double fruit, and those are unmarketable. Again, with disease resistance, powdery mildew with the high tunnels, we have to be on the look for that, and anything that is susceptible to powdery mildew gets rogued from the program so that we can have better resistance in future generations. So here you can see that double fruit. The receptacle splits, you get fruit developing in two halves with a big gap in the middle, and insects can get in there, and that can really cause problems. You can see on the right there, there's a green fruit that isn't double. And what we think is that we get hot spells during certain times during development, and that can cause problems in that fruit development, and then it might go away. And generally, as the temperatures go down, we see less problems with it, so the later varieties don't see as much double fruiting as the earlier varieties. Here's powdery mildew. If you haven't seen it, it's not a very attractive thing to see on your fruit, a nice white fuzzy coating, and consumers really don't want to eat it. Even though it wouldn't hurt them to eat it, it's unattractive and unappealing. So this is our newest variety of Prime-Ark fruiting, Crimson Treasure. Came out in 2018. You can see it's a large conic-shaped fruit, very uniform, good color. The fruit size ranging 3 to 6 and sometimes larger. Very good flavor and shelf life. It can be picked very early at the pink stage, which really does help the shelf life. Has a very long harvest period with upright self-supporting canes that branch a lot, and that's where that high yield comes from. So we get a lot of branches with a lot of fruiting laterals and a lot of fruit on each lateral, so you can get a lot of fruit. They are relatively short, only 4 to 5 feet tall, but that branching really makes up for any lack of height, and that so we do get very good yields. We generally start to see fruit in this in our region starting at the end of August, and that will continue through the rest of the season into November. So a very long fruiting season that can be 8 weeks or longer, and so that also contributes to the high yields. So here you can see how it holds the fruit up above the canopy, makes it easy to harvest. You can see at the top there's still flowers developing there. So those are 30 days behind the ones that you're looking at ripe, and you see green fruit at all stages in between. So that will ripen for a very long time over the season. So here's a selection from the program to give you an update. 1614 is in commercial trials in California and throughout New York. shows very good promise because of the fruit quality, very large, bright red fruit. It's a little bit weepy because of the heaviness of the fruit, but the pedicels are very long and they hold apart from each other. So we think it has good potential. It releases very easily from the receptacle, so it's easy to harvest. Here's another one, 1736. You can see this one holds the fruit very upright and out, makes accessing it very easy. It does remove easy from the receptacle, very good fruit quality, a little darker than 1614, but still seems to be acceptable. And we have that in commercial trials as well in various places. Moving on to floricane black raspberry. Fruit quality has always been a problem in black raspberry. Often it's because of size and sometimes softness. Black raspberry flavor is a very distinct flavor and people really like it. But the fruit size has been limiting in black raspberry, and there's not a lot to work with in the current varieties. And we do have some disease problems. Powdery mildew, especially as we use high tunnels, it's a real problem. They're very much more susceptible than red raspberry. And the clusters being tighter cause more problems with gray mold. And so we can see issues with that. And winter hardiness is not a huge problem, but sometimes when the plant gets tall and starts to weep, the canes get thin and then tend to die back. And so some of this may just be pruning, but also more upright plants and less weepiness will give you a better winter hardiness. And so to improve some of these traits, we've been breeding somewhat with red raspberry, trying to bring in some of the larger fruit size and better disease resistance. But we do have to get back to that black raspberry flavor and a black raspberry fruit type. So you can see here some of the advantages or some of the advances that we've made. 1420BT, the T stands for thornless. So this is a spine-free type, and the spine-free came from red raspberry about 3 generations back. And so you see we've been back crossing to black raspberry to give us that black fruit back with the good flavor. The size is not where we'd like it, but it is very uniform, and we're now working with this kind of material to improve the productivity characteristics of this type of plant while maintaining that spine-free type. So you see the plant itself is very vigorous, has a very good crop load, and you can see the fruiting laterals from the tip all the way down to the base of the plant. But what you see is the clusters might be a little tight, and that can be a little issue with gray mold. And the fruit size then often when the clusters are tight tend to be a little on the small side. But we're making very good progress in this, and we see some very good material coming down the road. So this is another one that you can see an example of some of the material that's got red raspberry in it. You can see it has that dull look. It's a little purplish, and that's what we see with the hybrids. So it takes multiple generations of back crossing in order to get the black raspberry type back. This particular one carries the spineless gene, and so we're interested in using it in breeding and improving the black raspberry types while passing on that spineless trait. Moving on to Prime-Ark black raspberry. So this is a fairly new phenomenon in black raspberries. There's only one commercial variety named Niwot that is out, and it really is just a mild Prime-Ark fruiter. Doesn't really have a large commercial crop in the fall, but it does have a crop every year in the fall. Very good quality, that particular variety. Doesn't tend to be much different from other black raspberry varieties, though, in the summertime. The fruit quality is what we want. We need bigger size. We need that black raspberry flavor and firmness for some shelf life. We need productivity, better crop load. Black raspberry is notorious for having low crop load. And of course, we want spine-free, so they're a little easier to handle. Black raspberries tend to have pretty stout spines that are not fun to work with. And then disease resistance. And so like we saw in the floricane types, we're using red raspberry as a way to bring in some traits that didn't exist in black raspberry and try to bring those into the black raspberry background to improve this crop. So some of the things we're doing, here's a hybrid between black and red raspberries. You can see it gives you that purplish color, but you can see also this one was with a Prime-Ark variety. It's got a huge Prime-Ark crop. It's a hugely vigorous plant as well, more vigor than we want. Really, this plant, if you stretch it upright, it's probably close to 10 feet tall. But it does carry a lot of load, and we're using it in breeding to try to bring in that Prime-Ark fruiting into a stronger level in the black raspberry. But we need to bring the plant size down and reduce some of that vigor so that it's a little easier to handle. And then, of course, we need better fruit quality. We want black fruit. This purple fruit really isn't of interest to anybody. But as a bridge for selection, it is something we're using in breeding to advance several traits. So this is more typical of the Prime-Ark black raspberry material. You can see the fruit is generally at the tips of the canes. The canes are still very tall and vigorous at 6, 7, 8 feet tall. And so we need to bring those cane sizes down a little and make them branch a little more so we get a better crop load. But you can see the clusters a little bit wider, a little more spread open, and that helps with gray mold so that the fruit aren't touching, and it makes them harvest a little bit easier as well. And so we're getting some very good quality in the Prime-Ark material. As you can see here with 1534B, it is a very good black raspberry flavor, very good quality. Size is only moderate, but it is very uniform and pretty productive. And so we're moving in the right direction in the black raspberries for Prime-Ark fruiting. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about Prime-Ark blackberry. So I haven't done a lot of work with blackberry because the winter's so difficult for the floor cane types. But when John came, and you'll hear more obviously from John in a bit, when John came out with the first Prime-Ark blackberries, it really excited people, and with good reason. Unfortunately, most of the varieties that are out are just too late producing for us to get a decent commercial crop here. What we see is too much of the flowering and fruit development happens in September and October, and we just don't get enough crop yield. And then the canes get damaged in the wintertime and we don't get much floor cane. So we need earlier season production, flowering in July and August. Unfortunately, what comes with that often is poor floral heat tolerance. What happens, these flowers, they open we get a lot of misshapen fruit, poor fruit set, dried up fruit. They're just not going to produce any crop. And so we're selecting for things that set better and try to improve that heat tolerance so that we can have fruit developing in July and August and ripening in August and September, and we can get a good commercial crop. So I'll conclude with that, put up some other information that's available. There's a lot on the web. Center for Technology and Licensing can handle that. So you can contact her directly or contact me, and we can put you in contact and work something out. And in Canada, we have a representative with the Ontario Berry Growers for our varieties. So you can talk to Kevin Schooley if you're interested in trying anything in Canada. Unfortunately for Mexico, there is no open licensing there. We do have a partner in Mexico though, and we are doing trials there. But you would have to work through us and them potentially if there's any interest in the Mexican market. And with that, I'll conclude, and I'll take any questions during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Hello, NARBA members. It's great to be back with you in 2021, which we were all together for our meeting, but I'm glad we get to share at least a little bit online with each other. And I want to share a little bit about Arkansas blackberry breeding update today. First off, I want to talk about things back home a little bit. These are fabulous times at the University of Arkansas. Why so fabulous? Because there's lots of great young colleagues to work with. Many of you met Dr. Worthington, pictured there with me. Dr. Worthington is our fruit breeder at the University of Arkansas, and it won't be long before she has the whole program all to manage. I've got a little time left, but this has been a great working relationship, and we continue to move all the duties over to her. But also, Dr. McWirt, Dr. Cato, Dr. Dixon, Dr. Pertucci, Dr. Threlfall, all are going to make great contributions, already are, to berry research and extension in Arkansas, and that benefits people across the region and across the country. I just can't say enough about how great it is to have all these enthusiastic young people to lead the gathering of knowledge and sharing in the future. Also important in Arkansas is Dr. Jackie Lee becoming our resident director of our fruit research station at Clarksville. This is where our breeding program is based and most of our fruit research is done. Dr. Lee is trained as an entomologist, and prior to this appointment, she was an entomologist that worked with fruit crops and integrated pest management. So her new colleagues, Mike and Erica at Clarksville, along with Lacey and Carmen, all round out our technical support team in fruit breeding, plus a whole team of workers at Clarksville provide the support to get all this work done. It's been going on since 1964, so I believe this is our 58th year of fruit breeding, and the future is looking really bright. And you talk about getting out of the way, well, I'm fixing to. My time will end up in the end of 2022. I'll have 42 years in. That ought to be enough. A couple of resources and links to share. First one, if you want to look at the University of Arkansas Blackberries, look at the site that's provided there. This is the listing of YouTubes for our varieties. Also, there's a video there on primer on primocanes, our most viewed video of the group. And then I share some about primocane fruiting, what it is, a little bit about varieties, maybe a little better understanding of what that new technology is. I also write a column for American Fruit Grower and Growing Produce, and that link for the Growing Produce online versions of the column, or the link is given there. I share it several times a year on some current things or on my mind or I think are hot topics. So take a look if you'd like to see. Moving on, let's talk about a new variety from the University of Arkansas, Prime-Ark Horizon. The key things I want you to take away today about Prime-Ark Horizon include it is primocane fruiting. It's a thorny variety. It has reduced thorns on the main canes compared to Prime-Ark 45, but it is still thorny. It's a complement to Prime-Ark 45. Prime-Ark 45 is the most widely planted of the Arkansas primocane fruiters, and it's nice to have more than one to rely on, and Prime-Ark Horizon provides a companion to it. It has a couple of traits that are a little different than Prime-Ark 45. One is a little bigger berry in most of our trials. It has huge floricane crop potential. It has longer primocane fruiting crop potential than 45. It'll extend on several weeks at times, longer than Prime-Ark 45. And it just has impressive berries, as you can see in the picture there. What about the berry? Well, it averages 7.8 grams on floricanes, and I've seen them be a lot bigger than that. It averages 7.3 grams on the primocanes, and so it's a lot closer in floricane primocane berry size in our location compared to what we usually see. Sometimes we have very small primocane berries in our high heat. You can look there at the right and see Prime-Ark 45 on the left and Prime-Ark Horizon on the right. These are floricane berries that was taken sometime in the latter part of June. It's interesting, the primocane berries can be larger than the floricane berries. You can find this more often in California, but we sometimes see it in Arkansas and North Carolina. So probably making a little bit of progress in breeding for higher heat conditions, but I'm not saying that we have heat tolerance or resistance to heat in primocane fruiting yet. The berry has a 10% allele soluble solids content, ranges 9 to 11%. Titratable acidity usually runs under 1%, which is in our reduced acidity range, but there is some range in that. Only time I've found that Prime-Ark horizon can be tart is when it really has a heavy crop, particularly on floricane berries. And basically, when you get too many berries on a blackberry plant, they tend to be more tart, no matter what the variety or genotype is. The picture there shows the floricane berries held up against a primocane just beginning to flower, and this is in early July. Yield. It has a huge floricane crop potential, and it can be excessive. The picture there is near Lincolnton, North Carolina. That's a big crop. Now, especially pronounced the year after planting. Now, in our area of Arkansas and in most of the eastern United States, when you plant the plants, you won't get a primocane crop the first year. It'll be a different case in California where you would, mainly because you can get earlier planting done there because it's not so cold. This plant has had some of the largest yields ever recorded in our data collection at the University of Arkansas, over 30,000 pounds per acre in some years, even exceeding Natchez, which is hard to believe. That's too much. And so careful attention to pruning the laterals, shortening some of that growth from the year before for the floricane crop is going to be essential to make sure you have balanced cropping. The floricane crop varies also a lot based on the primocane crop the year before. Remember, every primocane bud that breaks in the late summer and fall is the buds that won't be there next year to fruit on floricanes. So it's kind of a balance of one or the other. But anyway, yield potential is good. What about the harvest period? The floricane's first harvest date averages about June 12 in Arkansas and west central Arkansas, Clarksville. With Ouachita, it actually ripens a little later on floricanes than Prime-Ark 45. And it has a fruiting period of about 40 days. The primocane first harvest date averages August 4, a few days before Prime-Ark 45, and it'll fruit for 60 days or longer. I picked them all well to the end of October. In the picture, you can see the primocane flowering on Prime-Ark horizon on the left is a little ahead of a primocane of Prime-Ark 45 on the right. So that shows that little difference in when the first berries would be ripe. Post-harvest, the overall reversion, reddening, is very similar to Prime-Ark 45, so we have seen some of that. We don't get a lot of reddening on either of these varieties in our post-harvest trials, but we do see that sometimes are reported by growers. The firmness is really good on this variety. It's one of the best I've seen as far as firmness, and it's firm for 7 days or longer. The low leak and retained firmness are among the best in our Arkansas program, so a lot of promise in that area. A nice berry. What about the plant? Now, this baby will grow. Look at the upper right picture. That's taken in late August. A lot of primocane berries ripe then, and look at the long fruiting laterals on that. In the lower picture, you can see quite a long area of fruiting. And that's where a lot of the yield comes from, continuing to fruit. So some kind of cage management will need to be worked out for this one, which we have not done in Arkansas because of this longer lateral. Maybe the key would be double tipping, as was found for Prime-Ark 45 to be very valuable, but we haven't done any studies with this. As far as winter hardiness, it's been hardy down to 1 Fahrenheit, the coldest we've experienced during its trial in Arkansas. And on chilling, just don't know that yet. We get a lot of chilling in Arkansas. We can't differentiate chilling requirements at our location. I want to touch on Ponca. I shared with you about Ponca a year ago. It's still my favorite. It's still the one I towed home. It's still the one that I'm careful about who I tell about where the berries are because they're just that good. Again, our sweetest variety that I shared with you before, it's a nice berry. Folks are really liking this one. It was fun to see the excitement over it this year since it had a name and a number of people that wanted Ponca berries. So things are looking good. First berries should be born commercially this year, and I hope it works out for people. One point about Ponca I want to mention is this shorter primocanes that emerge a little later, at least in our plots in Arkansas. The picture on the left shows the primocanes toward the end of floricane season, just beginning to ease up toward the top of the canopy on a T trellis. But the plants get regular full size by the end of the year, and those are dormant plants that they were not smaller or shorter or anything of that nature, and that's in February, and it's late June on the left. And when you compare these canes. So mention that because it is a little different in growing. Hopefully that's beneficial, particularly for not having to tip quite so heavily or so early on the prima canes associated with harvest time. I mentioned Caddo to you a couple of years ago. It had the first fruit was produced this year and commercially to a limited extent. People talk about the flavor of Caddo, and they're really tickled with that. Caddo has a nice aromatic component that really is pronounced. It's a half sibling to Osage, as I've mentioned before, so we're looking for flavor in the crosses with its common parent. It's a thornless red cane variety, bigger berries than Ponca. This one can run a little more acidic, and some people really like that. I don't prefer the lower reduced acid berries. But anyway, Caddo is looking fine. One final comment on it was in southern Georgia, they mentioned that it looked like it broke buds more like Washita, suggesting possibly a 400 to 500 hour chilling requirement. But we really don't know yet enough about Caddo to suggest what its chilling actually is. We've got a number of comments in the last couple of years about Prime-Ark Freedom in the Deep South. Just to refresh on Prime-Ark Freedom, it was the world's first thornless primocane fruiting blackberry in the commercial market. When it came along, it was an impressive plant, really big berries, and being thornless and primocane fruiting, it needed a place in the world, even if for home gardeners. So when released, I recommended it mainly for garden use, but also for local market potential. Didn't know exactly its realized value there or what it would be. But lately, I've had some really impressive results or suggestions of this is the winner for the Deep South. And the Deep South, I'm giving comments here from Houston over through Alabama, down to the Florida, Georgia line, and some down into Florida because of its apparent low chill on floricane's requirement. Alfred Froberg, and Alfred is enthusiastic about Prime-Ark Freedom, commented that we're able to give the customer a taste of blackberry and get them hooked so they'll come back from May to July to pick our other varieties. Alfred also says that he can have customers pick blackberries, blueberries, and strawberries all the same day at his farm, and that's something he had not been able to do. Others have commented about these early berries. And so let's look at those Prime-Ark Freedom berries there in Irving, Texas at Froberg's farm. Alfred also says big berries fill buckets and buckets pay bills. How can you say it any better than that? It does have a large berry, and that's pretty consistent with Prime-Ark Freedom. I think the key points I want to make here is a low chilling on the floricanes, not the primocanes, it's the floricanes, is really the key. We've had some years where chilling has not been that great in the Deep South, and so this one seems to be more in the area of 100 hours of chilling possibly. And so it'll just break buds consistently, and I think that yields to better yields on floricanes in the Deep South than we find in Arkansas. We often have some damage to the buds swelling and breaking early in our area, and that's probably not as common in the Deep South. Of course, these growers are getting retail prices for berries and not wholesale. By no means are we talking about this as a wholesale shipping berry. If you want more information about Prime-Ark Freedom, there's a link there of a newsletter article I wrote recently in our Southern Small Fruit Consortium newsletter that shares some more comments about this variety. I mention it because getting in the marketplace early is really important to get your customers excited, and this is something that's occurred kind of unexpectedly as far as a commercial use. It's always fun to visit with you. I look forward to other comments about Arkansas varieties. Let's look to the future. There are more good ones coming. And as I said earlier, the most important thing is the future. Dr. Worthington and colleagues in fruit breeding, they'll continue to get out these new varieties with innovative traits. And I just can't say enough good about that. I'm really honored that our program continues. A few years ago, I thought that I might be the last fruit breeder at Arkansas, But that's not the case. The program has grown. The value of our varieties around the state, region, nation, world has increased, and that's made it really to be a sort of program that needs to continue, and I'm really tickled that it is. So hopefully I can answer questions in my allotted remaining time, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
All right, well, I tried to play off that technical glitch. I'm not exactly sure what happened. It looked like my video just closed completely. So apologies for that, Courtney. I think it was the end of your presentation, but didn't mean to have that get cut off. And yeah, without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Tom, to start with questions.
Okay, great. We do have some questions here. We're going to go ahead and we're starting off with the question for Michael. Will machine harvestability be as important for Blackberry as Raspberry in the future? What are the greatest challenges facing Blackberry growers in the Northwest? So we really have two questions. First, about the harvestability being important for Blackberry as Raspberry is as Raspberry in the future. You may have to unmute.
Yeah, Michael and John, if you want to unmute and turn your cameras on, that'd be great.
Yeah, I tried to start my video, but it said I don't have permission.
Let me see if I can change.
It says that you won't let us be seen. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, good. Maybe that's all that's needed. I look about like that guy that just gave that talk.
Oh, yes.
You should be able to turn your video on now. Sorry about that.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so I was actually requested to pose a couple of questions for the group, I think, to sort of kick things off. So that was actually a question of mine for the broader community and for people who are listening, because as somebody who, I have a strawberry background and I'm moving into caneberry, that's something, you know, that I'm interested in here in the Northwest.
Okay, and what were your thoughts then, if it's going to be as important machine harvestability for Blackberry as the Raspberries?
Well, I don't know yet. Still pretty new here, but you know, it was one of the major goals or objectives for the program that, you know, Chad had set. And so we're certainly working towards that or planning to work towards that. But I haven't heard a lot from the growers or from the industry since joining about how important that trait is to them, you know, relative to what you hear from red raspberry. So that was the reason for the question.
Okay.
I guess from my end, the answer is I'm not sure yet. So.
Okay. And what would you say are the greatest challenges facing Blackberry growers in the Northwest?
Again, that was me asking that question.
Okay. Okay. All right, we have another question here asking what zone is Cornell in?
So Cornell is in zone 5 generally.
Okay.
So New York is generally 5-6. Might be some 4 down in Long Island, but generally 5-6.
Okay, thank you. This is for Michael. Of the Blackberries you mentioned to be released, are any of those East-West hybrids?
Yeah, so none of them are first generation hybrids, but the 4670-1 selection is 1 or 2 generations removed. So it should be, you know, 12 to 25% Eastern genetics.
Okay. This one is not directed to anybody, but the question is, are seedless Blackberries possible? Is any work underway on that?
Short answer is no, they're not possible. But there is possibility to make seeds smaller. And certainly I think John probably looks at seed size as we do in black raspberry more, but because that's the biggest complaint we get certainly is they're seedy. So smaller and softer seeds is possible, and we certainly are trying to do that.
So what's going to happen when Courtney and me are about 115 or 20 years old? Somebody's going to play that that video of Courtney saying that. And I'm going to be quoted as saying, "Never say never and never say always."
There you go.
And so I'm not trying to skirt the thing. It seems like a wild idea as far as seedlessness. As far as breeding for seed size, you can do it. I can tell one of the challenges I've had, it's just a personal challenge, is trying to keep seed size on my mind while I'm fooling with so many other things at one time. You can get big berries with small drupelets. It can be done, and that reflects small seeds in general, I think. And but it's not always that easy to do. And then when you get into seed size, it's not just the size, it's also how the seeds are coated. Some of them have a very slick coating and you don't notice it. And sometimes you bite into one and you think, boy, there's a gravel truck that I've bitten into, not a blackberry, because they're not slick on the outside. So that, you know, that's another sensation there. And then people vary. I remember Dr. Moore used to tell a story about George Darrow talking about how he didn't like those blackberries because they had those big seeds and it'd get under his plate. And Dr. Darrow was a very famous accomplishment. Now, Michael, that was a long time ago. Darrow, Courtney, you have some idea who Dr. Darrow was, even though we didn't get to meet him.
So I think there would be potential to remove the seed coat. I don't know if there's any natural process to do that at this point, but some of the gene editing work is very interesting. And there are other plants that have the seed coat doesn't develop. You see that with hulless pumpkin seeds. And there's some semi-seedless plums that have the seed coat's basically soft, so it can be eaten. So there's some potential. Whether the public would be interested in it is a different question completely if you were to use some kind of genetic manipulation to do it. But the potential is out there. There are natural mutants in other plants that don't develop a seed coat.
That's a good job there, Courtney. You backed yourself out of that.
If you have follow-up questions along the way, go ahead and put in the questions and answers. We'll get to them at the bottom of the page. Okay, the Crimson series, how well do they do in tunnels?
Well, so the Crimson series we're all developed in tunnels, 4 tunnels. And in our region, I mean, there's still a lot of U-pick and people like to be out in the open, but the fruit quality is just not there for open season, for open field production. So we really are encouraging growers to try tunnels. So most of the Crimson series are fairly late season. So the tunnels actually accentuate their production season and extend that into November. And so to get the most out of them, you need tunnels to be able to get that late season fruit. And for growers who really want to extend their farm market and have berries into that season, they're really good for that.
All right, what is the ripening season for Crimson Treasure? When does it ripen relative to some of the older varieties out there?
So Crimson Treasure is a really long harvest season. So it kind of starts in the mid-season, even early mid-season. So we start seeing ripe fruit at the end of August in New York, and it branches a lot down the cane. So we continue to get fruit until November. So during that period, it would overlap with Heritage and go beyond. It would overlap with Caroline and then go beyond. So it really has a very extended season because of the amount of branching it does. And you'll see that in some varieties where all the fruit's concentrated at the top. And we're trying to get more varieties that will break bud farther down the cane so that you'll have branches and a longer harvest season.
Okay, thank you. Are there any differences in issues with the spotted-winged Drosophila across raspberry and blackberry cultivars, or are all available varieties equally susceptible to spotted-winged Drosophila infestation?
Do you won't have that? You have raspberries, so you're the man.
There are, and Hannah Barak, who's talking tomorrow, is one of the leading experts in this, and she's done quite a bit of work. From what I understand, there are preference differences between varieties, but only when they're presented different varieties. So if you have large blocks of any one variety, they really like them. And it seems to be the same for blackberries and raspberries. It is one of their preferred food sources. So, you know, the best bait we can put in a trap is raspberry puree. So it gives you an idea just how much preference there is for that fruit. I suspect we could breed for varieties that they don't like, but we probably wouldn't like them either. They'd be lower in sugar, firmer, just really not a great eating piece of fruit. So.
All right, Dr. Clark, with the very high floricane yield of Prime-Ark Horizon, is double cropping a problem? There's two parts to the question. That's the first one.
Well, you know, is it a problem? You know, that's a good question, because when you start moving the primocane varieties around, they do different things. And so back when Prime-Ark 45 began to be commercially produced, particularly in California, it was found out that if you produced a floricane crop, you would delay the primocane crop, and you could also lower primocane yield. Now, I was not able to learn that in Arkansas, because sometimes we don't get much primocane crop. So we got a new variety. So where's the trade-off going to be? That's an interesting thing. This is a little different organism. It looks to me like it has that, as the picture showed, that more distal fruiting. It was interesting. Since I made the video the other day, I was at Clarksville about 10 days ago, and I just walked by the Prime-Ark Horizon plot, and I noticed it looked like a floricane plot after pruning. It wasn't cut halfway down like some of the canes are on primocane fruiting, depending on how much they fruit. It looked like a standard plant, and I had never noticed that before. So I think that more distal fruiting actually puts the fruiting area further away from the main cane, and you cut that off because it fruits, because it dies after it fruits in the fall, and that's probably what's yielding more plant to yield. Now, this trade-off of one crop or the other, I'm just not sure on that. I think that would have to be found out. But the fact that it fruits longer, you know, is intriguing for us. I had the best primocane berries last fall I think I have ever had. I never had real good blackberries, or hardly any blackberries, in October before. Now, folks don't go out and borrow money to get a big crop of October blackberries now, but that was interesting. So I don't know if I answered the question. I talked around it though, Tom.
Sure. And the second question basically was further clarification that I believe you addressed.
Okay.
Okay. To Courtney, what is the resistance to the intermediate black, red, raspberry, purple types as potential varieties in themselves?
So purple raspberries have been around for a long time. There are a few varieties out that have been successful. Royalty and Brandywine are probably the two most well-known varieties. A lot of it is problems in the marketplace for where to put them. So the color is often dull, so they don't present well for fresh market. The flavor is unusual. It's somewhere in between black and red, and people are somewhat confused. So a lot of it could be marketing, could, you know, deal with some of those problems. They are a great processing berry if you want raspberry jam, because they're generally more fleshy than what you'll see in red or black raspberry. And so you get a really nice product with a really deep purple color. But growing raspberries in our region to make jam is really, we're not competitive with the Pacific Northwest. So it's just for local sales, and making a lot of jam is not high on most people's want list for raspberry varieties, at least in our region. So it's possible we could have a variety that is a shiny purple that has a good flavor, and they do pop up once in a while, but they're challenging to grow, and that is not our target. So it's not that we're not going to, if we were to get a good one, but I'm already breeding more crops than I should, so I don't want to add one more category to my list of things. So.
Okay. Thank you. This next one, I believe, is a comment that maybe someone can put in context. pairwise working in this using gene editing, I believe.
They are. So Pairwise is a company in North Carolina, and they work very closely with a lot of the raspberry researchers, including myself and Margaret and Gina. And so they're very interested in advancing gene editing work, and rubus is one of the species or one of the genuses they're working with. It is a longer term project, and there are certainly, and you can hear from Sherry tomorrow, talk about from Pairwise, and she will fill you in on what's going on there. I think there's great potential. There's still some questions on public acceptance, but there is no reason that raspberry or blackberry should be left out of those advances. So there are certainly traits that we're interested in, and that they are working on, and that there's quite a bit of work going on. Predicting when product might come out of that is not my area. It's pretty difficult to do, and I would urge you people who are interested to tune in to Sherry tomorrow and listen to what she has to say on the topic. It's fascinating technology.
Okay, this is for Dr. Clark. Can you talk a little about commercial yield potential of Cato and Ponca?
Well, on Cato and Ponca, they meet the goals of yield potential that we have. You know, our main target is comparison to Ouachita. That's the industry standard. So we kind of shoot for somewhere around 15,000 pounds per acre is a comparison in our research plots. So these are in that area. And I look for something that's consistent in that area. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about pencil farming here, where you take 15,000 and you divide that by how many flats you're going to get and multiply that by $18 a flat, and you're a millionaire as soon as you can get them picked. Okay, so be careful about that. Jason, I see you asked that, but generally the yield potential is there. What I've learned over time is yield potential in one place is not necessarily yield potential somewhere else. It can exceed anything you can believe. Someone told me one time that they needed 4,000 flats in Watsonville, California to be able to make it a viable operation with floricane varieties. Well, I said, you're not going to get it. Well, they did. And that was with floricane varieties. So it depends on how they're managed and a lot of other factors, quality of plants, management of the planting, other factors all come into there. But we generally say that they are equal, but we'll find out in a few years with people will find different things with these probably, depending on where you are.
Okay. Another one for you. Have there been any commercial plantings of Ouachita, and I assume in the Pacific Northwest, B&W?
Well, I'm not the one to ask on that. Michael or Dr. Bernadine Strick would have an idea. I occasionally heard comments over the years from Dr. Strick or Dr. Finn about growers having the Arkansas varieties because they used them for local market things. And I think some were shipped. And, you know, the main reason you would use those is they were not for machine harvest or processing, or for local market, a little firmer. And so, so I don't know. As far as I know, they are there, but I don't know about relative importance or comparison. You know, Ouachita, after it was released in 2003, became kind of the go-to variety, at least in much of the country, for a shipping quality variety. And one of the keys on that, which goes back kind of the previous question, it just had stable yield capability across environments, unless you got too far south where the chilling requirement of 400 or 500 hours is too much. It had pretty good hardiness unless you got up, you know, more in the upper Midwest or that area. And so I can't say for sure because I've never had a good feel for that. Michael, do you have any, I don't want to put you on the spot on this. This would be a very obscure question for you to know the answer to, I believe, but maybe somebody just walked up and told you one day and you're young and you can remember everything.
Yeah, I don't have any specific commercial plantings that I'm aware of, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if it were being grown in a lot of locations here. So, you know, and we test some of those selections at OSU NREC alongside our trials as well. So it's definitely being grown, but I'm not sure about specific trials.
You know, one of the experiences I had many years ago, and this was a real concern for me 20, 25 years ago is we had like Chester and then some of the other USDA thorn lists like Hull and Dirksen. They were really high yielding, like 20, 25,000 pounds per acre. And back then we thought we had like 10 to 12,000 pounds per acre. So I thought, this stuff's not going to work if you can make that many berries. Well, that hadn't turned out to be an issue whatsoever. And so I'm thinking in the Pacific Northwest, I think Chester did really well. I knew it was grown commercially for shipping in Washington. And so if you had something that came in that yielded less than Chester, and Chester worked for you and the season was right, you might not go that route. Now, I don't know what the yield potential of Washita is, but anyway, that's again kind of talking around the topic. Now, I see Dr. Strick has commented here that she says, yes, there are a couple of large growers of Washita. So the lady of knowledge has spoken. Thanks, Bernadine.
Is there a loss of winter hardiness as black raspberries are refined in breeding? Our wild black raspberries overwinter perfectly, while the available refined cultivars seem to die back. Is there a particular cold hardy cultivar out there?
With black raspberries, the problem we've seen is that they're all very, very closely related, the varieties especially. So I would say no, there aren't any more hardy varieties than others. I think they're all pretty similar. It's possible in the wild there is germplasm that would give us better hardiness. Unfortunately, using the wild material gives you small fruit. So it's a challenge to use the wild material in the black raspberry breeding, and fruit size has been a challenge all along in that. Michael Dossett is well versed in the black raspberry germplasm. He may be able to provide a little more information on that. But in our experience, we haven't seen a lot of differences between the varieties.
I wonder if the gene editing capabilities for fruit size and hardiness will have potential horizons for that. Courtney, you don't imagine you won't comment on it, but theoretically, reckon?
What we see when we plant out wild material is that there's not a lot of diversity. So you plant out seedlings and they all look the same. And when you have that happen, it's hard to make progress because there's nothing to choose from. And we even toyed with going with seed and inbred seed for production practices because they were also uniform rather than because propagation of black raspberry in the field can be challenging because of the way it grows. We've discontinued that, but that is a big part of what we want to bring in from the red raspberry is to try to bring in some of those genes for size and potentially hardiness, but we still have to get back to the black raspberry color flavor. And as Michael was saying, when you breed with the wild stuff and then you select, in this case, if you're breeding for black raspberry and you cross with red and then you're selecting back towards black raspberry, you lose traits very rapidly if you're not specific about what you're looking for.
The other day, someone said something about they'd heard we were going to have a seedless cherry. I never seen a seedless cherry. So, and I don't really know much about this, but I figure that whatever process that produces seeds could be altered by gene editing, and then whatever hormones make the fruit large, which seeds are needed for most cases, could be replaced with other sequences to do that. So I thought maybe hardiness and fruit size, as long as they're characterized, whatever the sequence that control that might be done in editing. These are just ideas.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that seedless cherry, but I just heard that I don't know if it's concept or application, but it's an interesting idea.
There are certainly, fruit size is one of the things Pairwise is looking at very closely. And hardiness that's a difficult thing to measure. That's always our problem, is getting an accurate phenotype, right? We have to accurately measure it in order to find the genes behind it. And it's very difficult to do because the environment that we're working in is not uniform. And when you add that variability from the natural environment, it confounds things. It adds error to your process. And that makes it very, very challenging, those types of traits. And it's most likely those traits are very, that there's multiple genes involved too, as most of the breeders would agree, I think, and that makes it extra challenging. Towards that seedlessness, there was a study in Italy years ago in raspberry, making a transgenic raspberry that is seedless. And they would get drupelets and they kind of form, but it was never a normal fruit. That's where they ran into problems. And that's part of the issue with raspberry. Each one of those seeds is wrapped around with flesh, and each one technically is its own fruit. And anybody knows a strawberry, if it doesn't get pollinated well, you get funny shaped strawberries because you need the hormones developed from the seeds. And so you just don't get much. And of course, you get rid of the seeds, you got to stop selling it by weight because they weigh less, a lot less. So you have to change how you sell the fruit, because right now it's all by weight.
Well, Courtney, if it's seedless, you've got a triple price. So you take care.
Right, exactly. You have to charge a lot more, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, whatever, whatever.
Yeah. Marketing can do amazing things.
Okay, we had a comment from Bernadine Strick relating to the hardiness. She says, we are seeing some differences in cold hardiness of black raspberry tip branch dieback here in Oregon with the germplasm tested at the OSU NWREC. Okay. Another comment came in here. Here's another one related to that from Michael Dorset. I think a lot of the lack of winter hardiness that is seen in canes dying after having been weakened by diseases. We collected in wild material from zone 4 and had some germplasm selected from zone 3 that were evaluated. Okay. Another comment from Wendy Washi Earhart. According to 2020 plant sales in the Pacific Northwest, 1,500 plants went into British Columbia and none into Oregon or Washington. All right, go back to some questions. Wait a minute, I think there's another one relating. Okay, this is Michael Dorset. In the black raspberries we collected, all of the largest fruited wild populations we sampled had genetic signatures indicating cultivated ancestry. The size from a lot of the small wild material can be gained back in breeding in a couple of generations, but it takes time to select all of the other things from the wild ancestry that you're trying to improve with. Okay. All right, question here. Is there a loss of winter hardiness as black raspberries are refined in breeding? Our wild blackberries overwinter perfectly while the available refined. I believe I asked this, did I not? Did I just repeat?
Is that blackberry or black raspberry?
Black raspberry, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well, our wild black raspberries overwinter perfectly while the available refined cultivars seem to die back. Is there particularly cold hardy? I did ask that. I apologize. Yeah. I forgot to hit done. Okay. Dr. Clark, with the fruiting ability and vigor you described for Prime-Ark Horizon, I recommend a single higher tip to hit a high potential yield and double crop, if desired, compared to a double tip.
Yeah, and thanks for that comment, Dr. Strick. Dr. Strick has the answer. If she doesn't have the answer, she can come up with it given a little time. So I think that's a great idea. I appreciate that comment. Just to refresh this story, years ago when we had the first primocane selections, IPF 8 and 12, I contacted Dr. Strick and I said, if you can figure out how to grow these things, and she did. She was the one that determined. She and Ms. Ellen Thompson worked on that to work out how to tip. So of course, Dr. Strick has a great feel for the plants, and she can just see a few pictures and get the answer. Now that's the kind of skill I wish I could get before I got done, but I don't see it coming in 22 months. That's my prediction.
All right. How does Oris 4179-1 taste?
Yeah, so that's the black raspberry, red raspberry hybrid. I actually did not have the opportunity to taste that one in 2020, but you know, I would imagine that relative to, you know, a background of black raspberries, the taste would probably stand out quite a bit, given that, you know, at least when I'm tasting blackberries, red raspberries, and black raspberries, the black raspberries relative to the other ones taste more the same to me. So I think it's going to stand out a lot from black raspberry. But I still haven't gotten the chance to try it personally yet.
Has the panel seen Driscoll Elvira side by side with any of the new Arkansas PF Blackberry, or any comparisons in growth habit?
Well, I don't have any comparison. I don't have Elvira. Of course, I've seen Elvira. It's a Driscoll proprietary variety, but I really couldn't comment side by side. And, you know, if Elvira somehow ended up in Arkansas, and it's not, just relax, Driscoll folks, don't worry. But if it was sitting there, it might act different when it hit the ground here too, compared to in California, because Prime-Ark 45 doesn't look anything like what it does here when it gets to California. So I think what happens, you go to California, you really let yourself go and expand yourself to your full potential. And that's what Prime-Ark 45 did. And maybe that's what Elvira is doing. And Elvira is a Primocane fruiting thornless variety of Driscoll, if people had not heard of that. And it seems to be very successful, I hear.
Okay. Dr. Clark, how does Mary Carmen APF 122 compare to Prime-Ark Horizon?
Well, APF 122 is a unique organism. You can tell by the number, it's a good bit older, and it doesn't perform well in Arkansas. It is much smaller in fruit size on floricanes compared to Prime-Ark Horizon. APF 122, many years will have very, very, very poor fruit set in our heat. And that's one of the reasons it never had any advancement here as a public variety, because it was it's just not good in that case. And so it would be small, and when not only small, it would be not have a set of drupelets necessarily. So there's basically, if you were out there in the field with me, you might smile and say, wow, that's almost like different organisms. However, you take any of these genotypes to a different environment and things change. And that's what's, well, you know, that's why plant breeding is so much fun. You don't ever know what you're going to get. It's almost like Christmas every day. Some folks are smarter than having to wade through a bunch of briars to find their present under the tree, but we choose what we choose.
We still have 92 participants. We're able to continue. We do have some other questions here that may be of interest. One is for Dr. Weber. What's your favorite raspberry variety?
It's a bit of a loaded question, but the best tasting berry that I've released is Double Gold. People love it. The best frozen berry that I've released, I like Crimson Night. It actually tastes better frozen than fresh, in my opinion. And I don't know if that has something to do with how when it thaws, the cells burst open, but some of the acidity comes out, and it's just a superior frozen berry. On other varieties from other people, there's some really nice tasting berries out there. Tulamine always is at the top of people's list. Jacqueline was one of the best tasting varieties ever. You just couldn't pick it. So, you know, flavor's not always the top of the game, because you got to be able to grow it and harvest it and get it to market. And so sometimes that doesn't always work out.
Okay. Dr. Clark, how do you evaluate berries for reversion and post-harvest in the Arkansas breeding program?
Well, we've got a post-harvest protocol that we developed with Dr. Penny Perkins Veazey over 10 or 12 years ago, when she was based back at the USDA in Oklahoma. So she developed this system of holding the berries and what to measure, and we varied a little bit from that and refined it a little bit. But basically, our fundamental test is 7 days in storage, and then we check for leak, reversion, mold, softening, and that's done that subjectively. And so we use some calculations to get an overall value. And then our colleague, Carmen Johns, is doing this now, and then she opens them all up and takes all this data and then tastes them to see how they hold up. And we started holding for 14 days also, and Carmen kind of has to judge, like, is this going to make 14 days or not? Because some things that's really putting pressure on them. And so that's the system that we use. And it seems to work pretty well, although there are disappointments. One of the disappointments I had was in our fluorocane test, for instance, with Prime-Ark 45, we hardly ever get any reversion. And I was really taken back some years ago when someone from California contacted me and said, we're having a terrific problem with this. And I thought, how could that be? So that was a primocane berry in California, and it was under a tunnel, probably had a good bit of irrigation, and I suspect a pretty good dose of nitrogen there. And I think there'd been a warm spell. And so it uncovered something that we didn't see, okay? And then we have rain effects that sometimes greater impact. But that's what we do. But this reversion thing is a lot more known about it than ever, but there's some degrees of elusiveness there with it. But we're further along than we are, I think. So that would be an answer.
We have a question here that isn't assigned to anyone in particular. Low chill environment may be the trend with climate change. What will be the trait that you will see? Okay, I have to be careful how I read it. What will the trait be that you will see, word for word? What will the trait that you see will be shifting? I think the idea is, what are you going to see shifting as far as a trait in the possibility of a new lower chill environment and climate change?
I want to comment on that, if it's okay, fellas, just go first. You know, when we had the big problem with blackberries used to be overwintering canes. That was number one. That's what limited blackberries, okay? And so when blackberries started being grown or trying to be grown in more subtropical environments, then it surfaced of chilling requirement problems, okay? And everybody that knows about blueberries, think about blueberries. If we didn't have low chill blueberries, there would not be blueberries like there are grown in the world today, all around the world, from the Florida genetics that arrived from Vaccinum darrowi. So it's like magic how that's occurred. And until about late 80s, early 90s, no one cared until they tried them in other subtropical environments. So with blackberry, of course, it worked out the two-piece system to spray it and use growth regulators and prune and shock the plants to simulate winter on a lower chill variety, two-piece from southern Brazil, and worked in Mexico. What's the ultimate low chill? Primocane fruiting. So that's the answer. Now we'll be careful about the ultimate answer because I never was in the category of coming up with the ultimate answer, but that's the answer because that eliminates chill. And so if you look at the big picture of where subtropical, particularly subtropical, possibly tropical, but subtropical climates are just, we have blueberries growing in those, and it's hard to believe what they do in Peru and Mexico and other areas. And so you take these plants, and the same thing with primocane red raspberry, I believe, and grow it here without chilling. Now there will be nuances, I believe, that you're going to see in different environments where different things work different ways. The big difference is that we don't have a blackberry you put on a boat and ride it for 30 days somewhere in the world. Blackberries still like to move fast, and so they like a spot in an airplane, and that's a higher price ticket. So that has a factor as far as who can market blackberries grown in these further away locations. Others probably have thoughts on this too.
No, John, I think you're exactly right with the primocane fruiting. I think as we see more and more breeding in those regions, and as we see more breeding in protected culture, that trait will become more uniform and more well understood. And that's what we'll see. You'll see more substrate production, I think, with tissue culture plugs pushing great vigor, and then they will be able to time them more accurately. But it will push more towards an annual production season or an annual production cycle in raspberry anyway. I don't know about blackberry, but it's certainly you can get enough growth and a crop on on a plant that really is only a few months old, less than a year old. So, I mean, it's not as fast as strawberry, but it's moving in that direction.
Well, the blackberry, there's enough variation now, you know, for primocane fruiting, floricane fruiting, long cane, maybe a long cane plant that ended primocane fruits after its primary crop, or floricane crop. There is evidence that there can be quite a bit of manipulation of pruning on blackberry. I've seen things that I cannot believe, except I was standing there and saw it, that have been done. And so that's where that cultural manipulation coupled with genetics, and that sounds really good. And there are lots of examples of where it worked. But it takes the combination of the two to come together. And in my little simple world, it takes individuals on both sides of that to come together and do it. And the doing part is kind of the easy part. It's the sticking with it until you get all the details ironed out. And breeders, of course, we just select forever, and cultural management people, sometimes they're better, then they can get the answer quicker. But those two things are together. And let's always keep in mind, okay, why is subtropical production so important now? And I mentioned blueberries because we watched the recent decision by the International Trade Commission about the restricting some of the imports during the shoulder season issue with blueberry growers. And that, and so why is that so important? Well, I mean, we talk about the plants. What drives that? Labor. Okay, so then you not only bring economics and labor, and then how you grow the plant, and you know how you're going to get the fruit somewhere. Is it going to hold up or not? And of course, not to mention if it's processed or not. And when you process it, well, now you got a soybean or a bale of cotton. Just put it on a boat, be frozen, bottled, juice, dried, whatever it might be. So interesting how the world works. But of course, to speak for our colleagues, plant breeders are behind all the big changes. And I'm going to make sure that's said. Now, Bernadine, relax. I'm just joking.
All right. I think we have one last question here we'll go with. Dr. Weber, can you describe to us the process for introducing a new variety to the industry?
So it's a complicated process because you have to have a partnership with your industry. You have to have a partnership with your nurseries. And of course, there's intellectual property involved. And so you have to have a partnership with your university or your institution, if you're a private company, for the intellectual property protection. So at Cornell, we do pre-commercialized testing with growers in New York and other places around the country and around the world. We patent all of our varieties, and in the US, we still have open licensing. And then we have partners in other countries. And then we work with nurseries ahead of time as well. We want them to be able to see the varieties before they're named so that they have some confidence in them when they come out. So we work closely with several nurseries to try to get feedback in advance. But it's challenging. There are not that many nurseries in our region anymore. Norse Farm is one of our large ones, and we work very closely with them, and we really appreciate all the help they give us. And North American Plants on the West Coast in Oregon, they do a great job working with us as well, providing plants for us in our trials in Mexico and other places. So it takes a lot of cooperation. It sounds like, oh, you just name a variety and put it out there and people will grow it. But that's sometimes the easiest part, is to name a variety and put it out there. And now you've got to get somebody to grow it, to market it, to produce plants that are high quality. And that's where we really rely on the nursery industry. Growers like Norse Farms and Indiana Berry and North American Plants, they really help us a lot in getting plants into the marketplace.
All right, thank you. Thank you to all of you. Again, thank you to our sponsors for today and for this session. Please be sure to visit their virtual booths in the exhibitor section of the website for this conference. Remember, we have Norse Farms, that's our host sponsor for today's conferences, and AgriStarts is our sponsor for this particular session specifically. And thank you so much to our presenters and to those who attended this afternoon. And you want to be sure to skip over there to that virtual hospitality room from 5:30 to 6:30 if you want to get a chance to talk with some other speakers and participants. And other than that, I'm going to turn this back to our technician and we'll close this out.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you again to Courtney, Michael, John, and Tom for moderating. And there's still 3 sessions later today, so we hope to see you in some of those. So thank you again and take care.
Thanks for everybody hanging in there.